and welcome to FFRF's Ask an Atheist. I'm Amit Pal, Communications Director here at the Freedom From Religion Foundation. This week, we are talking about how members of the Sikh faith are fighting against the proposal to put Bibles in Texas public schools. Joining me in studio is Hirsh Joshi, one of our legal fellows.
Hey guys, great to be here again.
And as always, we want to hear your thoughts on the topic we discussed today. Please leave your questions in the chat below or email them to askanatheist@ffrf.org. We'll try our best to answer your questions live during the show.
Joining us today is Upneet Kaur, Senior Education Manager at the Sikh Coalition, a nonprofit advocacy group defending Sikh Americans' rights. Welcome to the show, Upneet.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Well, Upneet, before we get started, can you describe Sikhism for those in our audience who are not all that familiar with the religion?
Yeah, so Sikhism, or also known as Sikhi, is the fifth largest world religion, and although most of its practitioners live in modern-day Punjab, which is located in India, throughout the diaspora, you can find Sikhs in many countries across the world. And at its basis, Sikhi emphasizes values of equality and justice for all, and also other values such as selfless service. And those are all things that we try to uphold in our day-to-day lives, but also in practice of our faith.
So we wanted to have you on the show since we saw that the Sikh Coalition, and really you in particular, have been fighting against this proposal about the school curriculum in Texas that would emphasize Bible references in K-5 English language and arts classrooms in the state. So can you tell us a little bit more about this proposal, who's behind it, and why it's such an important issue for you and the Sikh Coalition?
Yeah, so for some brief background, in May 2024 of this year, we were made aware that the Texas Education Agency had released open education resources, which is instructional material for K-5 English language arts classrooms. And within the material, what we found along with many other individuals is that there was a very large emphasis on Christianity in a way that wasn't just teaching about religion, it was more on the side of teaching religion. And that was of large concern for the Sikh community, but also many members of other faiths or those of no faith background at all, because it is quite exclusionary to do so in that manner. And also, there was minimal to no mention of individuals from different faith backgrounds, and Sikhi or Sikhism wasn't included at all. And as time has passed, it has been made aware that these educational materials were written or vetted through ways that wasn't really inclusive of community input in the beginning. However, recently some edits have been made to the language following the September board meeting.
So, Upneet, can you please get into some of the ways you've been fighting against this imposition of Bibles in Texas public schools?
Yeah, our work first started by looking at the curriculum itself here at the Sikh Coalition and seeing basically why it would be an issue for individuals from different backgrounds to have sort of this way of approaching the subject of English language arts for children at such a young age, and then working towards creating awareness among the Sikh community here on what was going on and what was at stake for the younger generation, whether it be for parents, for students, for individuals that went through public education. So we hosted a webinar in which we provided background context on the instance and also how individuals could submit public comments to vocalize their concern. And alongside this, we attended the board meeting in September to provide feedback on behalf of the Sikh Coalition on why we believed it was important that we see changes in the curriculum and the changes that we would like to see, and working with partner organizations such as Texas Freedom Network on an Instagram Live and a press conference discussing the impact it has more broadly for minoritized communities and just public education overall, such as what is at stake and the ways that this material was being incentivized or could be incentivized in the future, I should say. And following that, we also just wrote an op-ed in August from the Sikh perspective, my personal perspective, actually, as somebody that was born and raised here in Texas and went through the public education system. And now within the work that I do, how it's important to include the Sikh perspective in education spaces, but ensuring that when we're talking about religion, it's done in an age-appropriate manner and in a way that, once again, is teaching about religion and not teaching religion. So I would say that summarizes the work that we've done over the past couple of months.
And I remember that op-ed is what really caught my attention, and I thought, oh, wow, the Sikh Coalition is doing something about this. So hats off to you for that. So FFRF, we're fighting the Louisiana Ten Commandments law. We're also fighting the Oklahoma Bible mandate, but we're atheists. So sometimes people characterize us as spreading the evil agenda of the non-religious. So can you speak a little bit as to why it's so important for faith communities like Sikh Americans to combat these Christian nationalist efforts?
Yeah, so I think at its core, whenever we have initiatives such as the things that we're seeing in Texas, as you mentioned, in Louisiana and Oklahoma, is that it at its core is privileging one perspective and background in a way that makes another student or I guess just population in general feel very sort of targeted in the sense that their religion may not matter or does not matter enough to be discussed in a classroom, and that has a very poor impact on students, especially when they themselves don't see their faith included in the classroom or their identity not talked about. And it also results in things such as bullying for the student when their very visible identity, for instance, for Sikhs, isn't recognized, or it creates patterns sort of isolation of whether they are of importance to history, which if you look at history, it's not just one perspective or one community that has made contributions here in America. It's many communities that make up sort of the fabric of American history, of different traditions of this country, and even the values. So I would say that overall it kind of creates a generalization that is very harmful to students and just the real world and society as a whole.
And there are other minority religious groups involved too, correct?
Right. From what I've seen at the September board meeting is we had members of the Muslim community and the Jewish community also come out, and also members of the Christian faith that may practice Christianity differently than the way that it is portrayed in this specific curriculum.
Okay, and what can our viewers in Texas do to help?
So as of right now, there is actually a vote happening on Friday for the final decision on whether this curriculum will be passed on the approved list for local school districts to choose from. As of right now, I know that the Texas Freedom Network is running this program where you can email your local State Board of Education member, and if this were to pass finally on a final vote on Friday, then it really becomes sort of on individuals to come together, and whenever local school districts are looking to adopt a curriculum, to lead a grassroots effort to sort of vocalize their opinion on why they think that this curriculum is not right for students to be learning in the classroom.
Sure. So, and I think a lot of our viewers and our members would generally agree with you. But just in case there's somebody who's, on the fence, can you tell us a little bit more about the curriculum itself and what, some examples as to how it privileges Christianity over all other faiths?
Yeah, so I think at its core, one of the things that we can look at is the fact that despite these revisions that they've made to include other major world religions, you will see religions such as Sikhi or Sikhism and many others included once, whereas Christianity is included all across different grade levels. So one thing is that it isn't as inclusive as it claims to be for this approach of having religious literacy or discussing different communities' contributions to this country. I think another component of it is that they've resolved a lot of the issues. However, sometimes there's still, in some lessons, sort of a wrong lens or framing put on different historical events. And if not looking at that lens, I think something to consider here that's been brought up time and time again is age appropriateness. A lot of these materials aren't suited for a K through 5 classroom, especially in the earlier grade levels when students are just starting to learn how to read. During this time, they're not only doing that, but in their personal lives, they're also learning what values their families have, things that their parents would like for them to implement in their lives. So I think age appropriateness is also a huge thing to consider if one is not looking at the faith component itself.
Sure, and I know that in Texas, the legislature just started pre-filing some bills as of a few days ago. Have you seen anything there that is of concern that might be sort of equivalent to this?
So I personally haven't had the ability to go through that yet, as we've been focused on the Bible curriculum itself. But what I can say is if we do see something like this pop up in the Texas legislature, again, that we will be fighting against it because every child deserves to be seen and included in the classroom in a balanced approach.
Sure. Let's do some audience questions, certainly. I think. Sure. So our first question here is, does the Sikh Coalition want its own religious texts in Texas public schools?
So that's a bit of a tricky question. I don't think we wouldn't contend that we want our religious texts in the classroom. What we would want is for students to have a general understanding of what the Sikh faith is and what its practices look like. But we would never want, for instance, like students to have to like take a religious text and apply it to their life. No, that's not something we would advocate for. Instead, we would just want students to be aware of things such as identity components, different Sikh celebrations, and our history, for instance, here in the United States.
Sure. Moving on to the next question. Is the Sikh Coalition based out of Texas, or is there a large Sikh population in Texas?
So the Sikh Coalition is a national civil rights organization, and we started our work post 9/11 with the rise in anti-Sikh hate and violence that our community had experienced then. But our staff is nationwide, really. We have around 20 full-time staff, and there is a very large Sikh population here in Texas itself. There's not an exact estimate available, but estimates from the community and different sources note that there is around 75,000 Sikhs that live here, and immigration to Texas began in the early 1900s.
And you spoke a little bit about some post 9/11 violence. Can you talk a little bit more broadly about some misconceptions about Sikhism and Sikhs in America?
Yeah, so the misconceptions vary widely, and over the years, I think, have grown in different ways, but there's often sort of a misunderstanding of, for instance, different articles of faith that Sikhs wear, or sort of what is seen within their visible identity. For instance, the turban is often mistaken as an indicator of somebody that might be, for instance, affiliated with terrorism. There's been a lot of xenophobic violence that has proliferated over the years. And for instance, in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, a white supremacist had killed many Sikhs that were in a congregation at Gurdwara on Sunday in 2012. So over here, I think over the years, I think that the violence has grown. It's not something that's new. It's been around since Sikhs have been in America, but it's definitely grown after 9/11 due to a lack of understanding or misunderstanding of the Sikh identity.
So, Upneet, your mention of 9/11 really catches my attention, and I remember the anti-Sikh violence back then. I mean, given what we are heading into, are you all sort of, I know I'm asking you to look into the crystal ball a bit, but are you anticipating perhaps something of that sort, and are you coordinating among your own group and other groups to counter that?
In terms of what, I may ask?
In terms of the results and the political atmosphere that we are facing, I suppose, the socio-political atmosphere.
Yeah, I think that's something that is very central to the work that we do here at the Sikh Coalition to protect the rights of us Sikhs here in America. And one of the ways that we do that is providing legal support and advocacy support in any way that we can. On my end, it includes like educational initiatives, whether that be reactive or proactive work. And also just in general, ensuring that whenever, if there is an instance of something like that, that we are able to ensure that justice is served for the members of the community, and it's used as an opportunity to educate the general public on the Sikh identity and sort of show the Sikh community's resilience over the years in different ways.
And can you tell us a little bit about your work in other states outside of Texas or even at the federal level? What can I see the Sikh Coalition doing there?
Yeah, our work spans across many different areas. In education work specifically, one of our focuses is countering things such as attacks on education, whether that be through book bans, anti-inclusive education initiatives, whether that be in curriculum, DEI, or other avenues that may be taken for that. But we also like to do more proactive work for inclusive curriculum, whether that be on AA-NHPI studies, general multicultural education initiatives, and in other work areas, we also look at issues of religious accommodations, whether that be for articles of faith, for different ways that individuals practice their faith, and things like that, workplace discrimination, and also different instances of civil rights issues that may not only be impacting the Sikh community, but also other minoritized communities as well.
Sure. And back to audience questions here for a second. What do you think is the ideal way to balance teaching religion without appearing to proselytize?
Yeah, I think that the key first is just having sort of an equal playing ground. So ensuring that if we're teaching about religion, we're doing so in a way that talks about individuals that practice different faiths, but also those that have no faith as well, or like religion that they practice. And it also requires, I think, doing so in a way that isn't teaching students, for instance, to say that something was this, but saying that some people believe, for instance, like the Sikh community believes that there is one God, rather than saying there is one God. So like very small changes like that, I think are very important. And also doing so in an age-appropriate way, I think plays a large role, like not asking students to apply different values to their life or to do those things, but instead saying, hey, this is how, I'm just going to use an example from the work that we do. This is a celebration that Sikhs have called Bandi Shor Divas. One of its key things was bringing lightness in a very dark period and explaining the historical event, but then asking students not necessarily to apply that learning to their life directly, but instead asking students to be like, how can you bring light into your life or practice values of equality and things like that. I think at the end of the day, it just comes down to ensuring that we're not sort of forcing students to learn about something in a way that requires them to make it sort of a truth that's applied to their life. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's kind of hard to explain. I think it just at the end of the day needs to be age appropriate and constitutionally appropriate.
Sure. And one of the other questions is, how do you combat religious leaders in the education space who are so clearly only advocating for Christianity in schools? Is it an actual counterargument to ask if they would be okay with Sikh text or practices in schools?
So I don't think we've ever used that counter argument. I think what we often like to emphasize is that it's important that like whenever a new curriculum or education initiatives put forward, it has to be representative of various traditions of its state. If it's not, that it's taking away the opportunity for these students to develop a genuine understanding of practices and perspectives outside their own. And at the end of the day, for us at the Sikh community, when we do face these issues with sort of this emphasis only on Christianity or on one perspective on history, is that like it is a genuine challenge to student safety and that it's backed up by data for the Sikh community. We did a survey in 2024 in which we found that nearly 8 in 10 Sikh students have experienced behavior categorized step bullying, and more than half those students say that their school is not at all inclusive of their religion. So we sort of like to indicate to the fact that whenever we see initiatives like this, it only perpetuates that problem further for members of our community. And lack of inclusion over the years has shown time and time again proving to be harmful.
Sure, and I remember you saying a little bit earlier about articles of faith, and one of the things that came to my mind was, of course, whenever the army or sometimes prisons have like a shaving policy, or you can't have facial hair, or you can't have long hair. Is that what the Sikh Coalition fights for, or can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, that is one of our areas of work that our legal team primarily deals with, and then also our advocacy team. We've had multiple cases where Sikhs have been asked to, for instance, either completely remove any facial hair that they have or to trim it and things like that. And for Sikhs, that's not allowed, especially if you are an initiated Sikh or if you wear the star and things like that. So in our legal work, we have worked to ensure that these individuals can practice their faith freely while also doing things such as participating in law enforcement and in the army.
Sure. Upneet, thank you for coming on to our show this week. Can you tell our viewers how they can follow you or your work at the Sikh Coalition?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me today. If you would like to follow our work, our handle is at Sikh Coalition on various social media platforms, I believe Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And also, if you go to our website at sikhcoalition.org, you can also subscribe to our community emails that go out with all our updates monthly on the work that we're doing.
That wraps up this week's episode of FFRF's Ask an Atheist. A new episode of our broadcast television show, Free Thought Matters, airs this weekend. FFRF co-presidents Annie Laurie Gaylor and Dan Barker will speak with Tia Levings, author of A Well-Trained Wife, about her harrowing escape from an abusive evangelical marriage.
The idea of being just a virgin bride was so essential that you needed to have a very short engagement. So both of our pastors had 2-week engagements. They talked about this frequently in sermons, that there was no reason to have a long engagement. You only needed as much time as it took to plan the wedding, which didn't need to be that fancy when we had weddings every Friday and Saturday at First Baptist. So the infrastructure was already in place. There wasn't a lot of planning that had to be done. And so the short engagements would keep you virgin is the whole thing.
You'll be able to watch that episode on TV stations around the country this weekend and soon on the FFRF YouTube channel.
And don't miss our weekly radio show, Free Thought Radio. You can find Free Thought Radio at ffrf.org/radio or wherever you get your podcasts.
And a new episode of We Dissent just dropped today. It's the only podcast hosted exclusively by women constitutional lawyers discussing state-church separation. Listen and subscribe to We Dissent wherever you get your podcasts, or check us out online on v-dissent.org.
Finally, if you want more information about the Freedom from Religion Foundation, check out our website at ffrf.org. If you're already a member, thank you. If not, please join us. See you next time on FFRF's Ask an Atheist.